Jack Boland is in Vancouver. He's with Pete and Freddie Paris tonight, and at this very moment he is doing a class for them, and I'm sure it looks just like this, and they're thrilled to see him, and I know he's excited about being there. So let's just kind of cozy in, put our things down, and get ourselves ready for an exciting lesson tonight, an exciting lesson of exploration and self-discovery, self-awareness. And I'm sure you know that that is sometimes a little frightful, to really take an honest look and see what's going on inside of us. E. Cummings said, "To be nobody but myself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle any human being can fight and never stop fighting." To be nobody but myself. Aren't we all looking at who we are? What makes us this person that gets up and goes into our day? This is the third of a 4-part series on personal inventory. And this is what we've been doing. We've been looking at this person that we are, and we've been looking at our personality. Our personality that we talked about the first week, that was developed by all of the things that we have learned about us, that have been said to us. It's the part of us, you know, that gets moody and gets a little snarky sometimes, and sometimes just has bad days and says, "Oh, well, doesn't everybody?" You know, that's just being human. Well, that's our personality, and we all have one. But there's another part of us that we talked about last week, and we called it our individuality. And we said that too is a part of each one of us, and very real to each one of us. It's that piece of God that's in each one of us, that only knows peace of mind, that only knows love, forgiveness, kindness. Actually, that's the powerful one of us, the really powerful one, except that we have never acknowledged it to be that. And so this personality got all puffed up and thought it was the most powerful one. And so now we have this struggle that goes on. And so in a class like personal inventory, we are learning to take the power away from the personality and give it to the individuality where it belongs, where it had always belonged. There was a program on at Christmas time. I heard the beautiful music coming from the other room, a young boys' choir. And you know how the sound of young boys singing is. And I came into the room and Ron had it turned on. And as I watched this boys' choir, I saw this. And I said, "What are they doing?" And he said, "Well, this is an Episcopal church in New York City. They have one of the finest boys' choir. It's an all-boys school. The boys are hand-selected to come here. They rehearse daily, and they perform daily. But a part of their training has been, during rehearsal, as they're singing and they catch their mistake, they raise their hand and keep right on singing. Nobody stops, shakes a finger, scolds, corrects. They have been taught to self-correct. Now, what if we had been raised like that? I mean, can you just imagine the first time you had a nasty thought, you went, whoops? Or you dropped something and it broke and you went, and then you just went on your way. You made a mistake. You corrected it, and then you just keep going. But unfortunately, we didn't get this kind of training. we said, "You know what I was thinking about?" And they said, "Don't you think about things like that? Shame on you. That's not nice." Nice boys and girls don't think that way. And if we dropped something and we said, "Oh, it broke," go to your room and stay there all day. And don't ever touch my things again. Do you see the difference? And pretty soon, we got real smart, didn't we? We didn't tell them when we broke it. And we had some thoughts. We just kept them to ourselves, didn't we? Because you knew what would be coming if you told. And pretty soon, we got so good at keeping it all in and keeping it hushed up and making ourselves look very good that we started to believe it ourselves. We actually convinced ourselves we're really very fine people. But it's those persons and those situations out there, that's where my problem in life is. And if it wasn't for all that, I'd be okay. Now, tonight, we're going to challenge all of our belief systems that we've ever had about ourselves. We're going to look at ourselves very honestly and own up, not to anybody else, but to ourselves, what we've been thinking and how we've been feeling. You know, it was said that we are not on this earth to look through one another. We are on this earth to get each other through. And that's really why we're here. We're here as a support group for each other. Where else can you go to have a support group as dynamic as this? To sit here and talk about the parts of your personality that don't exactly thrill other people. And it's okay, because you're looking at it with the intention of doing something about it. We're going to talk about honesty, real honesty. You know, I have a friend who's a lawyer. He's in another state, and we were talking recently, and he said, "You know, I belong to several support groups, but my very favorite is the LCL." And I said, "What is an LCL?" He said, "The Lawyers Concerned About Lawyers." He said, "It's a 12-step program, support group for lawyers only." He said, "And do you know, of all the support groups that I attend, that one is my favorite?" He said, "We get down to nitty-gritty dime store change kind of things. You know, like if $25 comes in, but the case has been closed and there's no documentation for $25, what do you do with it? Put it in your pocket? Or do you write a letter and send it on to the client?" I mean, the real thing, he said, we really talk basics. What are we really all about? I know another young man who in his mastermind groups has said, "I have a habit of making these little flip remarks, and they're kind of sarcastic." He said, "But they're funny. You know, people laugh, and if you know me, you know that's how I am." He said, "But you know what? I've looked at that about myself, and I don't like it. And I want to change, and I need help. So if you catch me, would you please point it out to me if I don't catch it myself, because I want to change?" That's the kind of honesty we're talking about. You know, I remember when I was in high school, I graduated high school, and I was working my first summer job. And I was going to go to a local junior college. And there was a golf tennis pro, came into the office and asked where I was going away to school. And I said I wasn't, that we couldn't afford that, but I would be going locally. And she said, "Well, I could give you a scholarship." And I said, "But I don't play tennis." And she said, "That's all right. We have monies for other people too." She said, "You don't need to play tennis." And I went home and I said, "You know what?" I said, "I was offered a college scholarship today." And my mother said, "Well, you know, there were 5, 6 children in the family." She said, "We don't have money. You can't go away to college." And I said, "But it's a scholarship." And she said, "We couldn't even have the money to drive for gas back and forth." She said, "So we're not going to talk about it." And I never brought it up again. But do you know what? In my mind, for many years after, when anybody talked about college, do you know what I thought about? I could have gone, but they didn't let me. There was never any money. There were always these little ones, and not only that, if I went away to school, who would watch all these little ones? Because they didn't start coming till I was 10. And that was the story in my mind, and I honestly believed it that way. Until I was talking to one of your daughters here a couple of years ago, and she was telling me about her experience of not wanting to go away to school and the reasons why. And I heard myself telling her, because I had been in this program for a long time, looking more honestly at what was going on in me. And I said, if that's the reason you're not going, that's fine. I said, but make sure the reasons are right, because I didn't go either. And you know what? I didn't go because I was afraid. I was such a frightened person, even at that young age. I had so many comfort zones that I could not allow myself to step out of, that I didn't go. If I really had wanted to go, what could I have done? I would have called the schools and found out what other scholarships were available that would supplement this one. I would have found out what jobs at the campus were available so I could work part-time and supplement my scholarship. I didn't do anything. All I did is say, oh. And then I carried it with me. The truth was, I was afraid to be that far from home. I was afraid to live in a dorm. Because I spent so many years taking care of little ones, I really didn't know how to be a friend day in and day out. I just knew it from time to time, here and there. And you know why talk about that now? It happened so long ago. Because I saw something. I saw that I was a victim at 18. But I was a victim at 28. I was still a victim at 38. I had a lifelong pattern established from when I was very young of somehow things just didn't work out for me. If only circumstances were different, what I wanted to do could also be different. My life could have been different. And all of a sudden I had to look at that and say, Lenore, how honest are you? Do you always kind of set yourself up to look like the poor little thing so somebody will take care of you? Or do you really go after what you want? That's the kind of honesty that I'm going to ask you to start looking at your life with, because that's the only way that you're really going to make great progress in your life, if you're willing to tear down the beliefs that you've had about yourself and to go underneath. Because when you change those beliefs about yourself, your life changes. That's where growth comes from. We're going to start in with our defects of character, but first I'm going to ask you, before you start, don't try to take an inventory with your intellect. You will question everything I say from the first word on. Take it with your feelings. Do you know how somehow in your gut you just kind of know? You're saying one thing, but in your feelings you know the right answer. Take an inventory from your feelings tonight. And to help you get into those feelings, on the top of your paper, write, God guides my hand. God guides my hand to write what needs to be written by me. Be as a reporter. Stand outside of yourself, observing yourself. Get in the habit of doing that through your days. You know, for a moment, just step outside and look down at the situation you're in and watch yourself and listen to yourself and see what you can hear. And then I'm going to ask you to come back next week. This was the part of the class that I wondered, how can we do all of this? How can we get it all in? Well, we're just going to do it. We're going to do the negative today, and we're going to do the positive next week. Don't do this to yourself. If you come and just do a negative inventory, that's a disservice to you. You've got a positive side to you, too. And it's important. You know, some people have a harder time seeing that. Some people will fill up a ream of paper on their negatives and can't come up with one positive. It's important that we as people see both sides. The good, the not so good. So this is really a two-part class. We're going to start today, but we can't finish today. We will finish it next week. The character defect, and remember that's just a term that I'm going to use for different parts of us that are not functioning that well, like the part of us that makes alibis all the time. Do I make excuses, rationalize, and minimize my behavior? You know, do you always say things like, well, yes, but? Well, if only. Well, things aren't really that bad. You know, an hour ago you were ready to, but now sitting here, they're not that bad. Or it's normal under the circumstances. Ask yourself, what are your priorities in life? Whatever your priorities are, you won't put aside. You'll get right to them and start working on them. If inventory is a priority, you'll make time in your busy schedule. And then there's false pride. False pride is also called egotistical vanity, arrogance, being phony. See, we feel we're not worthwhile unless we're number one. And so we extend all of this energy proving to everybody that we're number one. And pretty soon, we start to believe it. And then we have this false pride that really doesn't connect with what we're doing. And when things don't work out, we can always say, his fault, their fault. There's always somebody to blame. When the truth is we're not seeing ourselves realistically. Do I say things like, well, I'm smarter than they are. I'm better looking than she is. I work harder than he does. Are those the kinds of things? Because those are the things you connect with false pride in ourselves. I give off smug looks. Spend money on clothes and cars I can't afford to make me look good. See, look at pride this way. It's been a survival mechanism for many people. If you have a lot of pride, you've probably felt a lot of humiliation. And so your pride gets built up, so you don't feel this humiliation anymore. But the only way to get through the false pride is by walking right through the pain and knowing that on the other side, it's a child who erected this false pride to protect themselves, and you don't need it anymore. Replace your fear with trust, and you won't have need for false pride. How about egocentrism, being self-centered? You know, the person who always feels persecuted by somebody else, or you're always feeling like you're being watched. You know your boss is watching you all day. 3 people are standing across the room, and don't you know it's you they're talking about? That's being self-centered. Do you feel self-conscious while dancing? Eating alone? Sometimes just talking in a group, adding to a conversation. You know what they say about an egotist? He's knee-deep in conversation. I've also heard it said that they want to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. The little lady said, it was a good thing I remembered my first aid lesson. She was telling her friends that she crossed the street and the cab came by and hit the man and it threw him and he was laying there. He was in such a bad way, and a friend said, what did you do? Well, fortunately, all my first aid came back to me, and I stooped right down and put my head between my knees to keep from fainting. Do I over-exaggerate my importance? Do I talk a lot about myself? How do I get my attention? Do I go around slamming doors and screaming or crying or sometimes just one tear? Or do I give people a silent treatment? Do I get depressed all the time? These are all ways that we bring on attention to ourselves in a negative way. What about perfectionism? Do you know where our perfectionism comes from? It is born of unrealistic and unreasonable demands and expectations that were made on us in childhood. And then we grow up, and we have unrealistic and unreasonable demands upon ourselves. Somehow we never do it good enough. No matter what you achieve, you're looking at the thing you haven't yet achieved. You're your own worst enemy when you're a perfectionist. And really, there's two kinds of perfectionists. One is the person who sits across from their counselor at the desk and is straightening out the counselor's desk while she's talking. Perfectionism. But then the other one is the person who doesn't do anything. I mean, they're just rigid. They can't move. They're so afraid of doing it wrong that they never do anything. And their problem is just as much perfectionism. The more negative feedback we've had in our life, the more negative will be my self-image and my confidence. Therefore, I have this great need to be perfect. And in trying to be perfect, I make unrealistic demands upon myself. Is perfectionism something that is a problem in your life? The only real solution there is to know that there's no perfectionism. This is not a perfect world. We are not perfect people. When you're perfectionistic, you're self-rejecting. Accept your limitations and learn to love yourself with your limitations. If you don't love yourself now, you won't later. Be comfortable but not complacent with your imperfections. That's the difference. Make it okay that you've got them, but don't get complacent with them. Do something about it. Beetle Bailey yesterday, the troops were all out marching, and the sergeant walked by and said, hold it, you're all out of step. What do you think you are, a bunch of people? Yep, we're all out of step, aren't we? We've all got something. And how about selfishness? Do I always want things my way? You know, some people, because of their upbringing, think anytime they think of doing something for themselves, they're being selfish. You know, that's not it. Selfish is when you want everybody else around you to do exactly what you do. That's selfish. You don't give other people the room to be different, to make their own choices. You want them to be carbon copies of you, and that is selfishness. More relationships are destroyed by selfishness than anything else because it becomes more important to be right than to be happy. Selfish people always need to be in control. They're always questioning and probing. They want to find out what you're thinking, what you're doing, where you went, so that they could feel on top of everything. And that's really selfish. Some examples might be, in case you have a hard time relating to this. I don't want to change my husband. I just want him to think like me. Now, I don't want to run my wife's life, but I just don't want her to work. A woman's place is in the home. I don't want to boss my spouse and children. It's just that I know better. If they'd only listen to me, you know, things would be much easier for them. I think a few people can relate. And what about worry? The definition of worry is fearing that something may happen that I'll be unable to cope with. Some behaviors might be nail-biting, hand-wringing, fretting, making mountains out of molehills, staring off in space, or just plain being apprehensive about everything. Worry is distrust put into a slot that makes it look very acceptable. See, if you tell everybody how much you worry about your children, they'll think, what a good parent. Really concerned, right? But the reality is that you're not trusting in a divine plan unfolding for that child's life, just like one has unfolded for yours in your life. See, worry can be triggered by the outside events, but we really produce our own worry from the inside. Without our permission, we wouldn't worry about anything out there. Everybody has something to worry about, don't they? I'm really worried, said one teenager to another. Dad slaves away at his job, so I'll never want for anything, and so I can go to college, and Mom spends every day washing and ironing and cooking my meals. And his friend looked and said, so what are you worried about? He said, I'm afraid they're going to try to escape. And what about our resentments? You know, resentment seems like such a strong word that most of us kind of avoid it and say, no, Yeah, there's some things I don't like too much, but resentments, that's too strong. So let's look at it another way. Let's say that resentments are those things that we think about over and over and over, and 30 years go by and you haven't forgotten yet what they did or said. Those are really resentments. It's the repeated not letting go of things that have happened. When you don't hold on to them, you don't think about them anymore. It's also known as grudge holding, righteous indignation, angry looks, or doing a slow burn. See, when I feel something is unjust and feel mistreated, I don't forget it, and I want them to suffer for what they've done to me. That's a resentment. And the worst part about resentments, very honestly, is that there are justified ones, right? Yeah, there are, aren't there? I mean, I'm sure you have one thing that you could go and tell somebody, and they'd say, he didn't. Well, if I were you, you know what I would do? You're handling it well compared to what I would do. And there you go. You walk away saying, see? I knew I was right. And so you continue to carry the resentment with you. But the thing that happens is these people go off and live their life, don't they? They're having a ball out there. And what are you doing? You're dying inside because of your resentment. So the only one that pays a price for resentment is who? Yes, we do. We each pay the price for any resentments we hold. What about envy? We like to think we don't envy, but do we resent the happiness or possessions or maybe the loved one of another? Do we criticize and put down accomplishments of other people? Are we always comparing ourselves? You know, comparing is always a losing proposition. You come out better than or less than. And the only way you can be a winner is when you start looking eye to eye and heart to heart, and you're equal to every other person. Comparing will always do you in. Do you secretly want what somebody else has, and so you have just bad feelings, and you pretend it's not there? Those are the little things we want to get rid of, the little secrets we have. Do I say one thing, but then my voice and my facial expressions are saying another? You know what I mean? Oh no, I'm not mad. Oh, that person? Oh, sweet. You know, those kinds of things. And then you walk away, and they said that you said something, and you said, well, I never said that. Well, they were hearing the tone and the look, not your words. More often, people hear the tone of what we say than the words that we say. So check that out. What do you sound like when you say things? And what about guilt? Guilt is one that we have learned very well. Most religions used guilt to control. Now that started way back in the times when governments were not formed to control people. And so probably because they needed to do it and people needed to be controlled, they used fear and guilt. But as times changed, the philosophy did not change with it. And so as a result, many people are suffering from a lot of unnecessary guilt. An example of guilt would be you can't enjoy your dessert because the person next to you is on a diet. And the plants you've been talking to die, and you're positive it's something you said? And what about taking 100% responsibility for your children and how he turned out? Well, he's got another parent. He's got sibling and grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors and peer groups and teachers and school systems. And here we stand thinking we did it all. That's erroneous. And it's guilt, misplaced. Take responsibility for what is yours, but not over responsibility. Do you lay guilt trips on others? On your children? Look at that. See how it feels to have guilt placed on you. And then ask yourself, now, do I turn around and do this to somebody else? And then there's manipulation. I will do anything to make it come out my way. I'll cry. I'll lay a guilt trip. I'll get angry and slam a door and threaten and blame, make false promises. I'll become very sweet and charming if you want me to. Or, when you manipulate, you could also withdraw and just ignore, because what is more painful than to ignore somebody? Or I could scheme behind their back. All of these are games, and when we play games, we're inside fearful of getting caught. And so you pay a dear price for manipulating. You don't feel good about yourself. You know, the only way to build self-esteem, you know, everybody wants more self-esteem. The way to build it is to learn to like yourself and like how you act. When you stop doing all of these things that are not nice, when you start really working on these character defects in your life, do you know, you inside of you start to feel like a pretty nice person? You really start to like yourself. And that's the kind of self-esteem that nobody can take away from you, because it doesn't come from outside of you. It's the kind of self-esteem that has lasting power in your life. And then there's self-pity. We feel the world should treat us a certain way, and when it doesn't work out, we start to feel sorry for ourselves, and we say things like, poor me. Why me, God? Why me? Nobody understands me. After all I did for them, they do this to me? Or, just leave me alone. I just want to be alone. And I over-dramatize everything, or I isolate myself and just complain. All of these are symptoms of self-pity. And do I just plain refuse to accept what cannot be changed? Or have I become willing to accept what I know can't be changed? And what about procrastination? Bingo, it got them this afternoon too. You don't start because you might fail. So if you never start, you'll never find out you're a failure, right? Or you fear success because then more might be required of you. I mean, if you do too well on your job, they might have a lot of expectations about what else they would like you to do. People who procrastinate also exert control by not starting. Their inner thought is, I'll do this when I'm ready to, and I'm not ready yet. So you're really in a control position when you procrastinate. You also control your closeness with people. You procrastinate and say, I'll call him tomorrow. I'll set these plans up next week. I'll have them for dinner next month. And so you procrastinate, but you also are in control of how close you want people to you and how often. You don't start because the task seems overwhelming. You look at the job and it's that big. Procrastinators see this big, every task. If they could learn to look at little steps that build to this big thing, they wouldn't be overwhelmed and they would start because they would know that each step leads to the finished product. So it's a new slant on looking at how you start a project, breaking it down into small parts. Has maybe somebody put off this inventory because you're afraid you won't do it perfectly? And so you're procrastinating a little bit? And what about intolerance? Do you always feel that you're right? Or else people who are different are wrong? You impose your values on others, and you actually get upset if they don't want to take on your value system. The actions of an intolerant person would be you're very opinionated, very prejudiced, race, religion, gay people, addicts. They're also known as a know-it-all, and sometimes even like a little Hitler. Everybody knows a little Hitler somewhere. An intolerant person always wants to have the last word. And they're also very narrow-minded. You know, if we don't like someone, the way they hold their pen will drive us crazy. But if we like them, they could pour ink in our lap and we would not even lose our smile. That's the difference. Some people fear failure. There are two ways of responding to this. One personality type might try too hard. They have this excessive need to win. They're very competitive and hard-driving and overambitious. And they really fear failure. But another personality might not try at all. They might really be very irresponsible, lazy, and give up easily. And they too fear failure. See, I feel that my worth as a human being depends on how well I do. And I wear myself out trying to reach my unrealistic goals. A New England home had a sign that said, "Fear not." Faith answered. No one was home. When fear knocks, who will answer? When the fear of rejection comes, how will you identify it? You might be a person who is always asking, did I do this right? Is this okay? You're really wanting approval and not wanting to be rejected. Or do you say things to people like, nobody understood me before you? I'll do anything you tell me to do. Just tell me what you want. See, we fear rejection so much that we put ourselves out. Or we could retreat and say, leave me alone. I don't want to do that. That's not fun. I don't care. I don't want that. And that, too, is a person who pushes things away because they really fear rejection. What about impatience? Impatience could most be likened to a child who just can't wait. They can't wait in line. They can't wait anywhere. They just want things right now. And people who are impatient, you'll find them beeping the horns in the cars quite readily, standing in line and tapping their foot, or, making noises and sounds, letting you know that they've waited too long. And a person who is impatient also makes unrealistic demands of other people. Hurry, hurry, hurry. We're going to be late. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And everybody's in a frenzy around an impatient person. And what about impulsiveness? Do I just blurt out my words without even thinking and then wish I hadn't said it? Do I start 10 things and don't finish any of them because I just like starting? Do I go to the store and buy up all these things and take them home and nothing is quite right? How does impulsiveness affect my life? And what about oversensitivity? Oversensitivity comes when what other people think about us is more important than what we think about ourselves. See, we have this erroneous idea that everybody will like us, and everybody will accept us, and everybody will concur with what we say. And if we think this, then we're setting ourselves up to be hurt. Because none of us will be totally liked, loved, accepted by everybody. It just doesn't work that way in the world. And if we can honestly get that feeling inside of that, it's okay if other people don't agree or don't like us. We give them the freedom, and we still can feel good about ourselves. Self-talk from an oversensitive person might be, "You don't understand me. Now, be careful what you say. I'm very sensitive. You hurt my feelings when you talk like that. If you really love me, you wouldn't do that." An overly sensitive person can't handle criticism. If you can't handle some criticism, you probably will never do much growing. In fact, that's one thing I'm going to ask you to do, is to ask for a critique of yourself. When you're working on your program, don't go indiscriminately asking other people, but you've gotten to know each other, and here some of you I see it come together every week. When you're working on your program and you really trust and value the friendship of another person who knows what you're all about and what you're doing with your life, and you're working on something, ask them what they think, how you're doing, are you making progress, can they see a change? Often they'll tell you before you need to ask. But be open. Learn to open yourself to some feedback. Without the people to give me the feedback all these years that I've had, I could never have made the progress in my life. And continue to ask for feedback. I want to hear what's going on with me. I want to hear how you observe me. Now, I have my own system for evaluating and judging. That doesn't mean I indiscriminately believe everything and anything, but I'm always open to hearing that thing that I need to hear so I can change. And we were talking about it this morning at home, and we were talking about how we will ask somebody to give us some feedback. And that person says, "Oh, well, okay," and they start to give us the feedback, and all of a sudden, and that person just does a shift and starts to tell you everything they think you want to hear. Because they saw that you really didn't want to hear the truth. You wanted to hear what you wanted to hear, and so they obliged you. If you really want feedback, watch that and ask and be open to it. Don't give yourself away that you're really fearing it, but be open to it. And what about insecurity? Do you continue to worry about things you have no control over? And what about laziness? Do I lack self-discipline? Do I always look for an easy way out? Do I only put half an effort into things? Or do I search around for somebody to do it for me? Do I give up too easily if the task is difficult? For this next week, you have a list. You heard exactly what you needed to hear. Inventory is a lifelong process. We take the layers. Remember the layers of the onion we talked about? We have self-awareness and self-growth and self-discovery layer by layer by layer. You're taking the first layer off. The rest of this week, I want you to look at your notes. You will hear things during the week that I've said that tonight may seem to have passed over your head, but during the week, they're going to start sinking down into your subconscious, and you'll be thinking about things and seeing things, and write it down for yourself. I want you to be self-aware, self-disciplined, to catch yourself, and write it down. Write your progress, too. And then give yourself a self-reward. Pat yourself on the back. You deserve it. And I'll leave you with this thought that when you get what you want in your struggle for self and the world makes you king for a day, just go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in your life is the one staring back in the glass. Some people may think you a straight-shooting chum and call you a wonderful guy, but the man in the glass says you're only a bum if you can't look him straight in the eye. He's the fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear up to the end, and you've passed your most dangerous, difficult test if the man in the glass is your friend. You may fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass. But your final reward will be heartaches and tears if you've cheated the man in the glass. Thank you. You have an exciting week ahead of you. This truly gets to be exciting work. At first, it sounds a little overwhelming. And you think that, people are just digging a little too much to get into these kinds of things, but are you going to reap the rewards when you really work at changing your personality?